Okay, think about this. A friend calls you up, super excited, right? And they say, my sister just had a baby last night.
Yeah.
What's like the very first thing almost everyone asks?
Is it a boy or a girl? Always.
Exactly. That immediate question, that automatic need to categorize, it just shows how incredibly central gender is. It's how we think about the world, how we relate to people, how we even live our own lives. It's like this foundational social lens we use for everything.
It really is, almost unconscious.
So, okay, let's unpack this a bit. Our sources for this deep dive, they really get into how anthropology looks at gender and sexuality. And critically, they move way beyond just, simple biological assumptions.
Right, it's about exploring the incredible diversity out there, the cultural construction of it all.
We're really looking for those aha moments, the things that explain why these categories shape pretty much everything we do, our social roles, our personal desires, the works. That's kind of our mission here. How did we get to thinking this way?
And what's really fascinating, I think, is that we're not just sitting here defining terms like in a textbook.
No, definitely not.
We're actually digging into the evidence itself. The biological, the archaeological finds, the ethnographic studies.
All of it, yeah.
Yeah, to understand not just what gender is, but maybe more importantly, why we organize our societies around it. And crucially, you can't ignore the power structures involved.
Defining, maintaining, policing these categories, it happens everywhere.
Exactly. Globally, it's complex stuff.
Okay, so to start, we absolutely have to lay down the groundwork. There are 3 terms people mix up all the time in just, everyday conversation: sex, gender, and sexuality.
Constantly.
Anthropology makes a really crucial distinction here. We need to separate the biological from the cultural, right? So let's tackle what seems like the easy one first: sex.
Right, so sex, it's generally understood as the biological part, the anatomical categories based on physical differences.
Like male or female, end of story.
Well, that's the common assumption, isn't it? A neat, tidy binary. But the source material really pushes back against that simplicity. It shows that sex is actually determined by this whole very long and complex list of factors interacting. It's not just one thing.
And that list is pretty extensive too, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. It includes the obvious, like visible genitalia, sure, but also internal organs, uterus, prostate, that sort of thing.
Then there are secondary characteristics, right? Things that show up during puberty, like body hair, muscle development.
And chromosomes, of course.
Yeah.
The XX for females, XY for males, that everyone learns about.
But even that's not the full picture.
No, not even close. It gets deeper when you factor in things like reproductive capabilities, hormones, testosterone, estrogen, and how our bodies even respond to those hormones.
Okay.
So when you actually stack up that whole list, chromosomal, hormonal, anatomical, you quickly realize that nature, well, it doesn't just draw a neat line down the middle. The way these factors interact creates a huge amount of biological ambiguity and diversity within the categories we call male and female, not just between them.
So someone could have, say, chromosomes typically associated with one sex, but maybe anatomical features or hormone responses that align more with the other, or a mix.
Exactly. It's a spectrum, biologically speaking.
Okay, so that's sex rooted in this complex, often ambiguous biology. Then social scientists brought in the term gender to talk about the cultural side.
Right. Gender refers specifically to the cultural stuff, the roles, the behaviors, responsibilities, rights, relationships, all the things that get assigned to people based on how their biological sex is perceived by society.
Perceived being the key word there.
Absolutely. And the fundamental anthropological insight is that gender is learned. It's not innate.
It's enculturation, right? Starting from the moment the doctor says it's a boy or it's a girl.
Precisely. And because it's cultural, what it actually means to be a man or a woman, the content of those roles, is incredibly varied across different societies. And it changes massively over time, too.
What was expected of a woman 100 years ago might be totally unrecognizable today, even in the same place.
Completely different.
Okay, so sex is biology, complex biology. Gender is culture. Then there's sexuality. How does that fit in?
Sexuality is related to both, definitely, but it's distinct. It's about erotic thoughts, desires, the practices people engage in, and also the sociocultural identities that get attached to those things.
So like sexual orientation.
Exactly. In American culture, for instance, we tend to recognize identities like heterosexual, gay, lesbian, bisexual.
But the sources point out the spectrum is much wider.
Oh, much wider. They mention pansexual individuals, for example, People attracted to others where biological sex, gender identity, or orientation just isn't a factor in the attraction, sometimes called being gender blind.
Right.
And then you have asexual individuals, people who don't really experience sexual thoughts or desires in the way others might. This variety just underscores that sexuality is every bit as complex as sex and gender.
And this is probably a good place to bring in heteronormativity.
Yes, crucial concept.
It's that often unspoken, deeply embedded assumption that heterosexuality is somehow the baseline, the natural, normal, default way to be.
And not just that, but the idea that sex, gender, and sexuality should all neatly align in this very predictable way.
Right.
Biological male, masculine gender, attraction to females, and vice versa.
And that assumption has real power, doesn't it?
Immense power. It shapes laws, social policies, religious views,
Yeah.
often making anyone who doesn't fit that neat pattern feel marginalized or even invisible.
But that idea has been really strongly challenged.
Vigorously, by global movements, by lived experience. And this resistance highlights something important, that sex and gender identity aren't necessarily fixed for life. They can change, shift, evolve depending on context, relationships over a person's lifetime.
That flexibility, that challenge to fixed boxes leads us nicely to the term queer.
Right, a term with a complicated history, originally used as a slur.
But reclaimed.
Exactly. Reclaimed in academia, in activism. It signifies a more radical approach, really, one that sees gender and sexuality as more situational, fluid, actively pushing back against those fixed, durable identity categories. It's often used as an umbrella term for nonconformity.
So queer theory kind of suggests these categories aren't things you are, but things you do, things that
Yeah.
are constantly performed, negotiated.
That's a big part of it, yeah. They're seen as emerging contingent, not these deep, essential truths about a person.
You know, for listeners trying to visualize how all these pieces, identity, attraction, expression, biology, fit together for an individual, the sources mention Sam Killerman's genderbread person diagram.
Ah, yes, that's a great tool. Really helpful.
It does a good job showing how these things combine in really non-binary ways to make up a whole person. It's worth looking up if you're trying to grasp this complexity visually.
Definitely recommended.
Now, often when people want to argue that gender is fixed, that boys will be boys or whatever, they fall back on biology or maybe animal behavior. But the scientific hunt for biological determinism, it's been pretty problematic, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Fraught with cultural bias from the get-go. The problem often starts with the lens you're looking through.
How so?
Well, when primatology really got going in the 1950s, the field was dominated by researchers steeped in the gender biases of that era in Euro-American culture.
Okay.
So they just assumed that male competition and dominance were the be-all and end-all of primate social life. Females were seen as passive, marginal, just focused on raising babies.
It mirrored the 1950s housewife stereotype perfectly.
It did. The breadwinner male, the dependent female, projected onto monkeys and apes.
But later research, by the 80s or so, that picture changed drastically.
Completely overturned it. Rigorous studies, often led by female primatologists correcting the earlier male bias, showed something totally different.
What did they find?
They found that the social core, the heart of most primate groups, is actually centered on related females. Kinship and solidarity among females often form the main social structure, not just male competition.
So females weren't passive at all.
Far from it. Females are often highly competitive themselves, they're sexually assertive, they actively choose their mates based on things like friendliness or helpfulness, not just who's the biggest bully. The modern view is that for pretty much all primates, both females and males are competitive and cooperative. Both are central.
That variability shows up even in anatomy, right? Which brings us to sexual dimorphism.
Right. Sexual dimorphism, that's just the size difference between males and females of a species.
And the old thinking was?
The old thinking was high dimorphism proved male dominance. Look at gorillas, where males are almost twice the size of females. That was taken as proof of intense male competition, leading to rigid male control.
Bigger males equals male dominance.
That was the logic. But where do humans fit on that scale?
We're not like gorillas, are we?
Not at all. Human females are, on average, about 90% the size of males. That puts us much closer to gibbons, actually, where the sexes are almost identical in size.
Interesting.
And anthropologist Adrienne Zillman strongly warns against jumping to conclusions about behavior based just on anatomy. She says there's no simple correlation between how bodies look and how individuals or species behave. You can't just read social roles off bones.
That's a really important caution.
It is. And maybe the ultimate proof of this biological flexibility comes from our closest living relatives. chimpanzees and bonobos.
Ah, the famous comparison.
It's remarkable because they both share something like 99% of their DNA with us humans. Yet their social lives, their gender dynamics are polar opposites.
Chimps are the male-dominant ones, right? Hierarchical, aggressive.
Infamously so.
Yeah.
Intense hierarchy, frequent lethal violence between groups. Bonobos, on the other hand, they're female-dominant, notably egalitarian and peaceful.
And they have that whole make love not war thing going on.
They really do. Their sexual behavior is incredibly frequent, very variable, same sex, opposite sex, all ages, and they use it constantly for social bonding, to ease tension, manage conflicts. It's a core social tool for them.
So what's the big takeaway from comparing chimps and bonobos?
The critical biological message is this. You have two species, almost genetically identical to each other and to us, showing radically different social structures built around gender and power.
So if our closest relatives can be so different.
And primate behavior absolutely cannot dictate what's natural or biologically necessary for humans. The lesson from primatology, just like the lesson from human biology itself, is one of profound flexibility. Humans are capable of a huge range of social expressions when it comes to gender.
Okay, so that bias we saw creeping into early primate studies, it didn't stop there, did it? It carried right over into how we thought about human evolution itself.
Absolutely. It fed right into those old persistent myths. Things like claiming women were biologically unsuited for public life, or that boys were just naturally better at certain subjects in school.
This is where the work of someone like biologist Anne Fausto Sterling becomes so important. Her book, Myths of Gender, sounds like essential reading.
It really is. She did this massive, exhaustive review of literally thousands of studies looking for actual cognitive and behavioral differences between the sexes in humans.
A real deep dive into the data. And what did she find after sifting through all that research?
The overwhelming conclusion, replicated again and again, is that the vast majority of studies show no statistically significant difference between boys and girls in cognitive abilities.
So things like math, language skills, spatial reasoning, basically no difference.
Pretty much. Any differences that do show up are usually tiny, often smaller than the differences you'd find just comparing any two random boys or any two random girls.
So that common cultural belief, girls are naturally better with words, boys with numbers or directions, it doesn't really hold water scientifically.
It's empirically weak, yes.
Yeah.
And more than that, Fausto Sterling points out how the data gets misused, even when a small average difference is found, say, in spatial abilities. If you look at the overall range of skills across the population, gender only accounts for maybe 5% of that variation.
Only 5%.
Only 5%, which means a whopping 95% of the differences you see between individuals comes down to other things entirely.
Like what?
Like race, class, the kind of education they got,
Yeah.
how they were raised, not some innate gender difference.
Which leads us to the practice factor. This seems like a really powerful counter-argument to biological destiny.
It is. Studies consistently show that even if there's a small initial gap in something like spatial skills, girls can often close that gap completely just with practice. They catch up to boys whose scores might stay the same without that extra practice.
So it's not biology. It suggests it's about what we encourage kids to do.
Exactly. It points towards cultural factors, the kinds of toys they get, the sports they're pushed towards, the activities parents and schools encourage more for boys versus girls. It looks much more like an issue of cultural opportunity and reinforcement than a hardwired brain difference.
And you can see that cultural shaping really clearly in some cross-cultural examples the sources mention.
Oh, definitely. Look at the Inuit. Researchers found basically no difference in spatial abilities between Inuit boys and girls.
And why is that thought to be the case?
They link it to the fact that Inuit girls traditionally have a lot more freedom, autonomy. They're encouraged to move around and explore outside the home, just like boys are.
Okay, contrast that with?
Contrast that with the Temne people in Sierra Leone. Studies there found that Temne boys consistently did better than girls on spatial tests. And, crucially, Temne culture traditionally restricts girls' activities and physical mobility much more than boys.
So, same human biology, different cultural rules, different test results.
Precisely. It demonstrates so clearly that culture and opportunity shape these outcomes much more profoundly than biology does.
These kinds of biases, they didn't just affect how we thought about cognitive skills. They shaped our entire story of human origins, didn't they? Through that really influential man-the-hunter hypothesis.
Oh, that theory had a huge impact. Popular in the 50s and 60s, it basically assumed that hunting was the main event in early human life.
And since men often hunt in societies we know,
The assumption was it must have always been exclusively male. right back to the beginning. And the claims based on this were massive.
Like what? What did they say hunting drove?
Everything important. Male hunting supposedly drove tool invention, the development of language, the growth of our big brains. And naturally, it led to men being dominant.
And where were the women in this picture?
Women were supposedly stuck at the home base, burdened by childcare, passive, dependent on the male hunters bringing back meat.
And this idea got picked up and run with, especially by sociobiology.
Oh, immediately. Sociobiologists used man the hunter to basically say, see, evolution designed men to be aggressive, dominant, competitive hunters.
And women evolved to be nurturing, submissive, focused on attracting a good provider.
Exactly. It became this neat, supposedly scientific justification for modern gender roles and inequality. Hugely popular in the later 20th century because it made existing social structures seem natural.
But anthropology came along and poked some serious holes in that story.
Devastating holes, really, on multiple fronts. First, look at actual contemporary gathering hunting societies. What provides most of the food?
Gathering, right, not hunting.
Right. Gathering usually provides far more of the daily calories more consistently and reliably than hunting does. Second, women and children are the primary gatherers. They're active, they're constantly working, meeting their own nutritional needs.
So the idea that women were just waiting around, dependent.
It's false. And the idea that pregnancy and nursing make women immobile or unable to contribute is also wrong. They remain active, often carrying infants while they work. The whole narrative of female dependence driving male dominance just doesn't match the evidence.
And in most of these contemporary gathering hunting groups, the relationship between men and women is...
It tends to be fairly egalitarian. Women's contributions are recognized. They have significant autonomy and influence.
This led to the counter idea, woman the gatherer.
Exactly. This hypothesis suggested that maybe early human ingenuity wasn't just about hunting spears, but equally about tools for gathering. Things like digging sticks to get tubers, maybe slings or carriers like the karosses made of animal skins used in southern Africa to carry babies and gathered foods.
But there's a problem with finding evidence for those tools, isn't there?
A huge problem. Those tools would have been made mostly of organic materials, wood, fiber, skins, things that rot away over millennia.
Unlike stone tools.
Exactly. The fossil record is full of durable stone spear points and hand axes, potentially linked to hunting. But it's almost completely silent on the likely tools used for gathering. This creates this massive inherent bias in the archaeological record that just happened to perfectly support the man-the-hunter story.
Wow, I never thought about the bias in the materials themselves.
It's a crucial point. And now, even more recent archaeological finds are challenging the men-only hunt idea directly.
Like that discovery in South America.
Yes, the discovery of a 9,000-year-old burial in the Andes. It was a female, buried with a complete hunting toolkit, including projectile points.
So, clear evidence of a woman who was a hunter.
Clear evidence. It strongly suggests hunting wasn't exclusively male, even deep in the past. So when you put the archaeological flexibility together with the biological flexibility we talk about?
The picture becomes one of variability, not rigid rules.
Exactly. Human gender expression seems characterized by cultural invention and adaptation, not strict biological programming.
Okay, so if biology doesn't dictate these roles and the archaeological record is more flexible than we thought, we really have to focus on culture itself. And this brings us to that core problem, essentialism.
Right. Essentialism is that gut feeling, that really powerful sense people have, that a trait like gender is just deep, real, unchangeable. So profound it creates this common identity for everyone who shares it.
That boys will be boys.
That's a classic essentialist phrase. Or think about that old nursery rhyme. Sugar and spice and everything nice, that's what little girls are made of. It literally claims gender is what you're made of. It makes it seem inherent, like your core essence.
It feels deep because it seems connected to our bodies, right? But anthropology argues this feeling of naturalness is actually naturalized by culture.
Precisely. Culture works very hard to make gender seem natural, inevitable, rooted in the body. And the classic evidence for this is Margaret Mead's work in New Guinea.
Her book, Sex and Temperament, foundational stuff.
Absolutely. She went there actually expecting to find universal, biologically based gender behaviors. And she was just stunned by the sheer cultural variation she found. Her findings blew essentialism out of the water.
She studied 3 different groups, right, and found completely different expectations for how men and women should behave.
Totally different.
Yeah.
She found the Arapesh, where everyone, men and women, was expected to be cooperative, gentle, nurturing, like that was just the ideal human temperament for them. Then she found the Mundugumor, who were the opposite. Everyone, men and women, was expected to be competitive, aggressive, even hostile.
Wow. And the third group.
The Chambuli. They seem to have a reversal of the typical Euro-American norms of needs time. Chambuli men were seen as kind of superficial, focused on art and gossip, maybe a bit neurotic, while the women were the practical, powerful ones, managing resources and taking the lead.
So the content of masculine and feminine was completely different in each place.
Completely culturally manufactured. It showed dramatically that personality traits we often think are biologically linked to sex are actually assigned by culture.
This idea that gender is something we do, something culturally assigned, leads to more modern theories, like Judith Butler talking about gender as a performance.
Yes, Butler's work is hugely influential here. She talks about gender as a kind of impersonation. You're performing an idealized version of man or woman.
An ideal that nobody actually meets perfectly.
Exactly. Nobody fully inhabits that perfect ideal. So gender becomes this constant effort, this ongoing work, to approximate a standard that doesn't even fully exist in reality.
It reframes gender not as a state of being, but as constant labor.
Constant work. And anthropology gives us really concrete examples of this gender performance work.
Like what?
Well, think about that Turkish government program mentioned in the sources. It helps disabled veterans access assisted reproductive technologies. Why?
To help them have children.
Yes, but why is that a state priority? Because fathering children is seen as absolutely essential work to restore their masculinity, damaged by their injuries, and reintegrate them into the ideal of the heterosexual family. It's work to perform manhood.
I see. It's about restoring the performance.
Or look at the example of Muslim women in Cairo. Their striving for feminine purity isn't just about prayer. It involves intensive daily labor, elaborate cooking, specific skincare routines. These acts are part of the work of performing ideal femininity in their cultural context. The key takeaway is gender isn't just something you have, it's something you do constantly, every day.
Okay, shifting gears slightly. Feminist anthropology really took off in the 1970s, partly to correct the record, right? Ethnographies had mostly focused on men's lives.
Exactly. There was a massive male bias in early anthropology. Feminist scholars started asking, wait, where are the women? What are they doing? What are their perspectives?
And what did that initial research find? Was there a link between women's work and their status?
A pretty clear link emerged. In societies where women made really significant direct contributions to subsistence, think back to the gatherer-hunter societies, where women often provide the majority of the food.
Yeah.
They tended to have much higher social status and greater equality with men. Their economic clout translated into social and political influence.
And this connects to Michelle Rosaldo's argument about the public sphere versus the private sphere.
Yes, that was a really influential idea. Rosaldo argued that the way many societies divide life into a public sphere associated with men, work, politics, authority, and a private sphere associated with women, the household, nurturing, domesticity was a key mechanism for women's marginalization.
Like the cult of domesticity in the mid-20th century West. Women confined to the home.
That's a perfect example of that ideology in action. But that simple public-private split got complicated pretty quickly
How so?
by the introduction of intersectionality.
Okay. Crucial concept. Explain that.
Intersectionality is the understanding that gender never exists in a vacuum. It always intersects with other parts of identity, race, class, sexuality, nationality, ability to create unique experiences of both oppression and privilege.
So it's not just about being a woman, it's about being a specific kind of woman in a specific context.
Exactly. And applying that lens immediately challenged the idea that all women were simply confined to the private sphere.
Because many women had to work outside the home.
Precisely. Think about women of color in American history, for example. Due to economic necessity, often rooted in racism and classism, many had to work outside their own homes, often doing domestic work in the homes of privileged white women.
So the private sphere of their employers became their public sphere of work.
Right. It shows that women's subordination isn't just about being kept in the home. It's deeply tangled up with systems of race and class as well. The binary was too simple.
Following this focus on women, anthropology eventually turned the gender lens back onto men, right? Studying masculinities as cultural constructs.
Yes, instead of just assuming men were the default norm, Stanley Brandis' study in Spain is a classic example.
What did he look at?
He looked at how men in a town called Monteros used things like folklore, jokes, community pranks, often targeted at or about women, to build camaraderie among themselves. And what he showed was that This joking in folklore wasn't just about women. It was about constructing what it meant to be male in opposition to female. They were constantly defining themselves against perceived feminine traits, even when women weren't physically present. Masculinity was being actively built.
Built in opposition, but again, that masculinity isn't fixed either. It's learned, it's flexible, like with fatherhood.
Absolutely. Look at the IKEA fathers in Central Africa. They are famous in anthropology for being incredibly affectionate and involved with their kids.
How involved.
Studies found they spend something like 47% of their day within arm's reach of their young children. That's far, far higher than in most industrialized societies.
Wow.
And the point is, this proves men aren't naturally bad at childcare or emotionally distant. It shows they are socialized into specific cultural versions of fatherhood. Some cultures encourage that deep involvement, others discourage it. It's learned behavior.
Okay, so we've chipped away at the biological determinism, we've looked at cultural construction, but the whole idea of a rigid male-female binary really starts to crumble when we consider the biological reality of intersexuality.
Yes, intersex is the umbrella term used for people who were born with variations in their sex characteristics, maybe chromosomes, hormones, anatomy, that don't fit neatly into those typical definitions of male or female.
The prefix intermeaning between, they fall biologically between those two neat boxes.
Exactly. And what surprises many people, I think, is how common this is.
It's not incredibly rare.
Not at all. Anne Fausto Sterling's research estimates that about 1.7% of all births globally are intersex in some way.
1.7%, that's huge.
It's massive. Think about it globally. That's over 2 million babies born intersex every single year. That statistic alone should make us seriously question the idea that biological sex is a simple two-category system.
What causes intersex variations?
It can be a range of things. Sometimes it's genetic variations, like having only one sex chromosome, XO, or 3 XXY. Other times it might be related to hormone levels or how the body responded to hormones during development in the womb, or just chance variations in how anatomy formed. The key thing is these are natural biological variations.
But culturally, we seem incredibly uncomfortable with that ambiguity. What's the typical medical response?
Historically, and often still today, there's this real rush to assign a sex. Doctors often urge parents towards immediate interventions, hormonal treatments, surgeries often performed on infants or very young children who can't consent.
And the thinking behind that is?
The thinking is often framed as helping the child's true or natural sex emerge, making them fit unambiguously into either male or female. But that very idea contradicts the biological reality, which is often a complex mix of traits. The underlying goal is often more about social normalization, making the child fit neatly into the existing binary social structure.
And there's a strong ethical critique of that approach.
A very strong critique. Critics like Fausto Sterling and intersex advocates like Hida Valoria point out that doctors performing these early surgeries often have to basically guess which sex assignment will fit better later in life, and they frequently guess wrong.
Leading to potential harm.
Leading to significant physical and psychological harm, trauma, and the need for more surgeries later. Many intersex adults refer to these non-consensual surgeries, especially on genitalia, as intersex genital mutilation, or IGM. The ethical argument is strongly in favor of delaying irreversible interventions until the individual is old enough to understand and give informed consent about their own body and identity.
So the existence of intersex variations really demonstrates that sex isn't a binary with a hard line between male and female.
It absolutely shatters that idea. It reveals sex as more of a multidimensional spectrum of differences, and crucially, there's often far more biological variation within the categories we call male and female than there is between the average male and average female.
Because that biological ambiguity is natural, it makes sense that some societies didn't force everyone into just two boxes. They developed multiple gender systems.
Exactly. Many cultures historically had systems that recognized more than just man and woman. They often included one or more categories of variant gender.
What's a variant gender?
It's basically an accepted social category for someone who might be biologically male or female, but adopts the roles, behaviors, or even appearance associated with the other gender. Like a female variant, who takes on traditionally male economic roles or leadership traits and is recognized and accepted in that role.
And the best-known example from North America would be the Two-Spirit people.
Yes, that's a relatively recent pan-Indian term coined in 1990 to replace the older, often problematic term bird egg. It refers to the diverse range of third or variant gender roles that existed in many Native American cultures before colonization.
And importantly, these individuals weren't typically seen as outcasts, were they?
Quite the opposite in many cultures. Two-spirit people were often highly valued, even revered. Their blended or alternate gender identity was often believed to give them special insights, spiritual powers. They frequently served as healers, mediators, spiritual leaders.
And they were often known for excelling at the work usually associated with the opposite biological sex.
Yes, male-bodied individuals living as women might be praised for exceptional skills in things like cooking or beadwork. Female-bodied individuals living as men might be renowned hunters or even warriors. Their unique position was often seen as a source of strength and unique abilities for the community.
What about their sexuality? How did that fit in?
It was generally defined by their lived gender identity, not their sex assigned at birth. So a two-spirit person living as a woman would typically have sexual relationships with men who are not two-spirit. A two-spirit person living as a man would typically have relationships with women who were not two-spirit.
So neither the two-spirit person nor their partner would have been considered gay or lesbian in the modern Western sense.
No, that framework didn't really apply. It was about social roles, contribution, and lived identity within their own cultural system. It was much more fluid.
But these traditions were suppressed.
Tragically, yes. European colonization brought intense pressure to conform to a strict gender binary. Assimilationist policies, especially the horrific boarding schools that operated from around 1860 to 1978, actively worked to stamp out these practices and identities. It's only relatively recently, partly spurred by the broader LGBTQIA+ movement, that many Native communities are working to reclaim and revitalize these lost traditions. So we've seen gender as complex, cultural, performed, but we absolutely cannot forget it's fundamentally about power. It's a system that organizes hierarchy, distributes resources, assigns authority.
And to understand how that works, we need to look at gender ideology.
Right. Gender ideology isn't just personal beliefs. It's a whole coordinated set of ideas about gender roles, capabilities, and worth that gets embedded deep within our major social institutions, family structures, religious doctrines, political systems, the economy.
And globally, the most widespread, most historically persistent gender ideology is patriarchy.
Yes, patriarchy, defined anthropologically, is a gender ideology that positions men, specifically senior or dominant men, as the natural rulers of both the private household and the public sphere.
Meaning they control family resources, they govern the behavior of women and children who are seen as dependent, and they overwhelmingly hold the positions of leadership and authority throughout society.
It's an institutionalized system of male dominance baked into the structures of society.
You know, I used to work as a wedding videographer years ago, and I saw this ideology play out constantly, even unconsciously.
How so?
You'd have these highly educated, professional, middle-class brides, women who were totally independent in their daily lives. But come the wedding day, they'd often just revert. They'd follow these ancient traditions that screamed patriarchy.
Like wearing the white dress.
Yeah, symbolizing purity, even if they'd been living with their partner for years. But the big one was the giving away. Almost every single bride insisted on being given away by her father.
Ah, that's a perfect modern example. The symbolism there is incredibly powerful, isn't it?
It really is.
That language being a gift, being transferred from the father's authority or care into the husband's domain, it perfectly enacts that patriarchal ideology. It positions the woman as a kind of dependent object being passed between men in the transaction of marriage.
Even if consciously they didn't think of it that way at all.
Exactly. When an ideology like that becomes so normalized that it just feels like tradition or common sense, that's when it becomes hegemonic. It gets incredibly powerful and resistant to change, even by the people it might subordinate.
And historically, we see examples where patriarchy wasn't just the default, but was actively strengthened over time, like in India.
Yes, the history in India provides a stark example of patriarchy becoming more rigidified through law and custom. While male dominance existed in the earlier Vedic period, women still held some authority, especially as mothers within the family.
But it got stricter later.
Significantly stricter in the post-Vedic period, particularly with the codification of Hindu law. This period saw the reinforcement or introduction of practices like child marriage, female infanticide, and the ritual death of widows known as sati.
These were all ways to control women.
They were powerful mechanisms to control female sexuality, ensure male lineage purity, and consolidate property and power within the male line. While social reforms in the 19th and 20th centuries have certainly improved conditions, especially for urban women, Many underlying patriarchal structures, like the patrilineal extended family, where senior men hold authority, still persist very strongly, particularly in rural areas. The history shows a conscious tightening of male control over centuries.
Okay, so if patriarchy is so common, why don't we see the opposite? Why isn't matriarchy societies ruled by women a thing?
The matriarchy question. It's important to be really clear here. Matriarchy means hypothetical political and economic rule by senior women over men and the society as a whole.
Hypothetical being the key word.
Absolutely. The sources are very clear on this. While matriarchy exists as an idea, a concept, sometimes a fantasy or a political goal, there is no known contemporary culture where it is actually embedded in the real structures and institutions of society.
But what about societies that trace descent through the mother's line? Matrilineal societies, aren't they matriarchal?
That's a very common confusion, but no. In matrilineal societies, while kinship, identity, and often inheritance pass through the female line, actual political leadership and authority over resources are still almost invariably held by men.
Not the mothers or grandmothers, but their brothers.
Exactly. Typically, it's the senior men of the matrilineage, the mother's brother, the maternal uncle, who holds the power and makes the key decisions, not the senior women themselves.
So matrilineal is not matriarchal.
Correct. We also see the idea of matriarchy pop up in theories like Mrija Gimbutas about ancient Europe.
Right, she proposed that Neolithic Europe was this peaceful, egalitarian, goddess-worshipping society run by women.
Until it was supposedly overthrown by violent patriarchal invaders on horseback.
But that theory isn't widely accepted now.
It's heavily criticized, mainly for lacking solid archaeological evidence for political rule by women. While there's lots of evidence for female figurines and likely a focus on fertility, translating that into proof of institutionalized female dominance over men is a big leap that most archaeologists don't think the data supports.
So the conclusion remains. Patriarchy is a documented structural reality in many places. Matriarchy is not.
That's the anthropological consensus based on the current evidence. Matriarchy as a system of rule doesn't appear to exist institutionally.
But just because patriarchy exists doesn't mean all men automatically benefit equally or easily, right? Anthropology complicates that idea of simple male privilege.
Very much so. Being male doesn't grant you a free pass. Consider Daniel Jordan Smith's study of Igbo manhood in Nigeria. The title says it all. To be a man is not a one-day job.
What did he find?
He found that for Igbo men, masculinity isn't just something you're born with. It's something you have to constantly achieve and demonstrate. It's a lifelong, stressful, resource-intensive struggle.
Centered on what?
Centered almost entirely on money. You have to earn enough to pay bride wealth, support a large network of dependents, sponsor lavish community events like funerals. Your status as a real man depends constantly on your ability to generate and distribute wealth.
So it's a source of huge pressure and anxiety for many men.
Tremendous pressure. The weight of performing masculinity according to those cultural standards is immense. It shows that male privilege isn't uniform. It has to be earned and maintained, often at great cost.
And conversely, even within these often quite rigid patriarchal structures, women aren't just passive victims. They find ways to navigate the system.
Absolutely. Look at Alison Heller's study on women dealing with obstetric fistula in Niger, a really debilitating condition often accompanied by social stigma.
How did they cope?
They showed remarkable agency by actively mobilizing their kinship networks. They'd rely heavily on their mothers to advocate for them, to help them get medical care. They also strategically used their relationships with their husbands to try and lessen the stigma and maintain their place in the community. They weren't just accepting their fate, they were actively working the system, using the resources and relationships available to them to assert their needs and interests.
Okay, let's turn finally to sexuality itself. We know early anthropologists like Malinowski saw it wasn't just some marginal biological drive. He found it woven into everything in Trobriand culture.
Absolute. Kinship, art, magic, politics. Sexuality was central, not peripheral. And Margaret Mead, when she wrote about adolescence in Samoa.
She calls it a golden age of freedom.
Yes, precisely because Samoan culture at the time had this relatively relaxed, open attitude towards young people exploring romantic and sexual relationships. It was such a stark contrast to the repressive norms back in the U.S. and Europe in the early 20th century.
But sexuality isn't always about freedom and exploration. Power dynamics play a huge role, sometimes in very damaging ways.
Definitely. Peggy Reeves Sandy's research on U.S. fraternity culture is a sobering example. She highlighted how patterns of verbal and physical aggression against women could become almost institutionalized in those settings, often fueled by alcohol and drugs, and tragically contributing to sexual assault. It shows how power structures can shape and enable harmful sexual behaviors.
Now, one of the biggest challenges to thinking about sexual identity as fixed for life comes from looking at historical examples of same-sex practices in cultures that otherwise really emphasize heterosexual marriage.
Yes, the Azande people in Central Africa provide a fascinating pre-colonial example. Their unmarried adult warriors weren't allowed to marry women until they retired from military service.
So what did they do?
They would formally take younger men, adolescents usually, as temporary wives. They'd pay bride wealth to the boy's family, set up a household, and the boy would take on the roles of a wife. There was a recognized sexual component, too.
But this wasn't seen as being gay in our modern sense.
Not at all. It was a temporary, socially structured arrangement based on age, military status, and marriage rules. It wasn't about an internal, fixed identity. The sexual practice itself was specific to, typically, between the thighs, as anal intercourse was apparently disapproved of. Once the warrior retired, he'd marry a woman, and his former boy wife would then likely become a warrior and take a boy wife himself.
So it was a life stage thing.
Exactly. And interestingly, among Azandi women in polygynous marriages where one man had multiple wives, same-sex relationships were also reportedly common. Wives might form deep love-friend bonds, sometimes involving sexual practices, perhaps using carved phalluses. These relationships were officially discouraged, especially after missionary influence, but seemed widespread as a way to find intimacy and companionship.
So we have situational same-sex practices. What about more ritualized forms?
Gilbert Hurt's work in New Guinea described what he termed ritualized homosexuality. In the group he studied, there was a belief that teenage boys needed to ingest male essence to grow strong and become potent men.
How do they do that?
Through regularly fellating older male mentors. Again, this wasn't about identity or orientation as we understand it. It was a necessary ritual practice for achieving manhood within their belief system.
How does that compare to something like supine in Ghana?
Sapid is different again. It refers to these intense, emotionally and often physically intimate bonds formed between senior and junior girls in single-sex boarding schools. These relationships were very common, widely understood, but generally seen as a temporary phase before the girls left school and entered heterosexual marriages. So you have ritualized practices, situational practices, life stage relationships, all distinct from a fixed, lifelong identity.
This cultural variation really forced anthropologists, and society more broadly, to rethink sexual identity. Roger Lancaster's work in Nicaragua showed something interesting about roles, didn't it?
Yes. He found that in Nicaraguan working-class culture, men who considered themselves conventionally masculine and heterosexual could engage in sex with other men without damaging their own masculine identity.
Yeah.
If they always took the active, penetrative role in the encounter. The man being penetrated was coded as feminine or queer, but the penetrator maintained his machista status. The key wasn't the gender of the partner, but the role performed during the act.
Fascinating. So identity was linked to the role, not the act itself.
In that specific cultural context, yes. Now, contrast that with the global LGBTQIA+ movement today, which asserts that same-sex desire and relationships are about identity, are the real thing, not just a temporary phase or role.
And this has led to new ways of thinking about family and kinship.
Absolutely. If kinship has traditionally been based on biological descent through heterosexual marriage, the LGBTQIA+ movement challenges that foundation. Kath Weston's study of lesbian and gay families in San Francisco in the 80s was groundbreaking.
What did you find?
She showed how people were creating chosen families networks built on shared values, love, mutual support, friendship, which functioned as kin, regardless of biological ties. It demonstrated that kinship could be based on choice and shared experience, not just blood.
Finally, looking at transgender experiences really highlights the fluidity and interconnectedness of gender categories.
Definitely. Consider the Igbo female husbands in West Africa. This was a fascinating social mechanism. If a father had no sons to inherit his property,
He could designate a daughter.
yes, he could ritually transform his eldest daughter into a male daughter. She would then socially function as a man, inherit the property, and could even take wives. These women were known as her female husbands.
And children born to those wives belonged to the female husband's lineage.
Exactly. It's a clear case where social role and economic necessity allowed for a ritual transformation that completely overrode biological sex in terms of status and rights.
Then there's Marcia Ochoa's work in Venezuela comparing beauty queens and transgender sex workers.
Yes, comparing the Mrs. pageant contestants. and the transformistas, trans sex workers. It's a striking juxtaposition because she shows how both groups often undergo incredibly extreme surgical procedures
To achieve what?
to conform to a very specific, exaggerated, often quite Eurocentric ideal of spectacular femininity. It shows how cisgender and transgender women can be caught in the same cultural web, striving through intense bodily modification to meet the same powerful, often unattainable cultural standards of beauty and gender performance.
This brings us right up to the present day, with debates around the end of gender, things like using gender-neutral language, the singular they, them, to try and move beyond rigid categories and promote equality.
It's a significant movement aimed at creating more freedom, especially for non-binary and gender non-conforming people.
But there's a critique here too, right? That changing language alone might not be enough.
That's the crucial anthropological caution. The sources point to the Twi language in Ghana, which is naturally gender-free. It has no gendered pronouns at all. And yet, the Akan society that speaks Twin is traditionally strongly patriarchal and matrilineal, with very clear gendered rules about property, inheritance, and political power. Language neutrality didn't erase gender hierarchy.
So the argument is that just adopting gender-neutral language or claiming to be gender-blind risks ignoring the deep, persistent social and cultural realities.
Exactly. It risks obscuring the very real inequalities, power imbalances, and even violence that continue to operate through these embedded categories of gender and sexuality, regardless of the pronouns we use. The structures are deeper than just the words. #SAGOutro.
Wow. Okay, so after digging through all of this, what's the big takeaway? What does it all mean?
Well, I think this deep dive really confirms just how incredibly complex these categories are. Sex, gender, sexuality. They're flexible, they're variable across cultures, they can change across a person's life.
And they seem driven much more by learned social roles, by performance, by power structures, than by some fixed, unchanging biology.
Exactly. It feels like human biology provides this wide range of potential, this incredible adaptability. But it's culture that really writes the script for how that potential gets expressed.
We've seen that adaptability everywhere, from primate behavior to human history, defying those simple binaries we started with.
We have. And maybe the core anthropological lesson here is the need for recognition. Recognition of the sheer diversity and complexity, both biologically and culturally.
Recognizing the variation within the categories, too.
Yes, and acknowledging the very real histories of inequality, marginalization, and struggle that are tangled up in how these categories have been defined and enforced across time and around the world. The complexity and the power dynamics within, that's the key.
So where does that leave us?
Well, maybe with a final thought to chew on. Let's go back to Judith Butler's idea of gender as performance.
Okay.
If gender is something we're all sort of performing every day, trying to live up to these cultural ideals, what happens if you deliberately fail to perform?
Fail to perform the role assigned to you.
Yeah, even in small ways. What kind of ripples does that create? What kind of freedom maybe, or what kind of resistance? What new possibilities might open up in that small, deliberate refusal to perfectly play the part?
Interesting question.
Something to mull over, perhaps, until our next deep dive.